The galaxy between galaxies smelled like burning copper and old grief. Sergeant Mara Voss had been hauled through enough of both to recognize the combination. She was lying on her back in the cargo hold of a new Accord transport when she heard the thump against the hull, two soft impacts, almost polite, like knuckles on a door. She had been awake for 31 hours straight, running on field rations and the specific flavor of stubbornness that gets a person killed on paper and decorated in practice. She sat up. The hold was full of crates. Somewhere inside one of them was the navigator's crystal, which was the whole reason they were here, which was the whole reason she had let command talk her into this particular assignment, which she was already regretting in new and inventive ways. The comm crackled, Hale's voice too loud. "Sergeant Voss, we've got a shuttle drifting off the port bow. Beacon reads Allied. They're asking to come aboard." She was already on her feet. "Don't open the bay." A pause. "They've got an Allied transponder code." "I don't care if they've got the Grand Marshal's personal seal. Don't open the bay." She was pulling on her vest as she walked. The corridor was narrow, white, and functional, the kind of design that tells you a ship was built for purpose and not for comfort. "Tell me what they look like." "Two figures, cloaked. They're saying they want to speak to the prisoner." She stopped walking. "They're saying they want to speak to the prisoner." Corporal Darren was below decks, in the secure hold, in a stasis pod that technically wasn't supposed to exist under new Accord regulation, but which Captain Hale had been carrying around since before the war, and had so far declined to surrender to any inspector who asked nicely. Darren had been missing for 6 years. 6 years was a long time to look for someone, long enough that people stopped looking. Long enough that you started to believe maybe the intel was wrong, and maybe the distress signal was a ghost, and maybe you were chasing a signal in the dark for personal reasons you'd stopped examining. 6 years. And now 2 cloaked figures wanted to speak to the prisoner. "Tell them the prisoner isn't available," Mara said. "Tell them transport protocol requires a 3-hour advance notice. Tell them anything. Just keep them talking." She hit the corridor at a run. She had spent 3 minutes buying time, the longest 3 minutes of her life, before the hull breached anyway. The breach point was clean, not explosive, controlled. Whoever these people were, they had cut through 12 centimeters of composite alloy with something that wasn't a torch, and they had done it in under 4 minutes, which meant they had done it before. And they had done it with the particular calm economy of people who do not feel the need to announce themselves before they've already arrived. The first one through was tall. Not just tall in the way of large humans, but tall in the way of something that had been built differently. Broad shoulders wrapped in a dark cloak, a weapon at the hip that glowed an unsettling amber, not the white-blue of standard plasma, not the hard red of the enemy's blades. Something in between. He moved like a man who knew exactly how much space he took up in a room and had made peace with it. The second one was smaller. Female, Mara thought, though it was hard to be certain through the cloak. She moved faster, not reckless, but quick, with the coiled readiness of someone who has learned to finish things before they start. Mara had her sidearm up. Behind her, 2 of Hale's crew had theirs up too. The corridor between them and the intruders was about 10 meters of white metal and fluorescent light. The tall one stopped. He looked at the weapons leveled at him, and his expression did not change in any way that Mara could read. He said something to the smaller figure beside him in a language she didn't speak. His voice was low, even. The kind of voice that has been careful for so long it has forgotten how to be otherwise. She fired. Not at him. At the overhead lamp panel, 3 meters to his left. The corridor plunged into backup red, the color that emergency systems use because it is maximally disorienting without being maximally dark. She was already moving when the light changed. 3 steps left, down, shoulder into the wall panel that released the containment bulkhead. An old override, not on any ship schematic. But Mara had been on enough transports to know that they all had one, and she had found it 2 hours after boarding because finding things like that is what she did. The bulkhead slammed down. She had bought maybe 40 seconds. She used them to get to the secure hold, slap the emergency override, and stare for the first time in 6 years at Corporal Darren's face through the glass of the stasis pod. He looked older in the way that people who have been somewhere bad for a long time look older. Not just wrinkles, but something in the architecture of the face, something in how it has been rearranged by what it has had to hold. There was a scar along his jaw she didn't recognize. "I'm coming back," she told the glass. The bulkhead shook. She did the only thing she could do, which was the wrong thing, which was the only option she had left. She took the navigator's crystal out of her vest pocket and looked at it. It was small, the size of a folded thumb, warm amber in the red emergency light. She had been told it was the only remaining copy of the coordinates to the dead galaxy, the place beyond the outer dark where things went when they were banished rather than destroyed. She had been told that under no circumstances should it fall into enemy hands. She thought about Darren's face through the glass. She put the crystal in her other pocket and walked to the comm. "I'm Sergeant Mara Voss of the 14th Forward," she said into the open channel. "I have the navigator's crystal. I will surrender it. I want one thing in return." The bulkhead held for another 7 seconds, and then it didn't. The tall one came through first. He had deactivated his weapon. That was, Mara would later think, the most frightening thing about him, the fact that he didn't feel the need to point it at her. He looked at her the way someone looks at a river they intend to cross, assessing depth without threat. Behind him, the smaller figure had pushed her hood back. Young Mara registered, younger than she expected. Pale hair, pale eyes, a face that had been schooled into blankness but hadn't quite got there yet around the eyes. "You said you would surrender the crystal," the tall one said. His standard was good. The accent carried an undertone she couldn't place, something from very far away in time rather than space. "In exchange for one thing." Mara said. She did not gesture toward the stasis pod. She didn't need to. "I give you the crystal, you let him live and you let him go." A silence. Something moved in the tall one's expression, so briefly that she almost missed it, and then was gone. He looked at the young woman beside him. She was looking at the stasis pod with an expression Mara couldn't read. Not hunger, not contempt, but something older and less legible. "We'll take you instead," he said. She thought about Darren's face. "Deal," she said. She handed over the crystal with her left hand and thought, "I'm coming back." The ship they put her on was not what she expected. She had expected a military vessel, compact, efficient, all function and no feeling. What she found was something that had been made and then been a long time in transit, a machine that had been lived in, marked by the people who had used it the way objects are marked when they become more than objects. She was locked in a crew compartment that was small enough to be uncomfortable and large enough to be honest, and she spent the first 6 hours cataloging everything she could see through the small porthole. The configuration of the stars, the angle of their transit, the faint luminescence of a belt of debris that she had never seen charted. The young woman, the smaller one, the quick one, brought her water and a protein block at what Mara estimated was hour 7. She set them on the floor inside the door without speaking and turned to go. "You could have just shot me," Mara said. The young woman stopped. "Back on the transport. You had me 3 times in that corridor. You could have dropped me and taken the crystal anyway." A pause. "Balin does not kill soldiers who aren't fighting." "Balin, the tall one's name, and you." Another pause longer. The young woman had a particular quality of stillness, Mara noticed, not peace but practice. The stillness of a body that has trained itself to show nothing, which was different from a body that had nothing to show. "I do what I'm told." "Who tells you?" The door closed. Mara ate the protein block and thought about the scar on Darren's jaw. The crossing took 8 days. She knew this because she counted them against the port window, marking each cycle of the ship's internal lighting, which was not quite tuned to any biological clock she recognized. On the 3rd day, she asked for paper and a writing instrument and was given both without comment, which told her something about the tall one she hadn't expected. She drew what she had seen through the porthole. She labeled what she could identify and marked the unknown coordinates with question marks. She did not know if it would be useful. She did it anyway because it was the kind of thing she did. The compulsive categorization of a person who had learned early that the world makes more sense when you write it down. On the 5th day, the young woman sat down outside her door and did not explain why. She was there for 2 hours. Mara could see her shadow under the door. She didn't knock or speak, and Mara didn't either, and eventually the shadow went away. On the 7th day, the energy blade wound she'd taken in the corridor, a graze, nothing deep, but deep enough, went septic in the way that wounds from alien weapons sometimes do, which is to say not in any way the medical training covers. The fever came in the night, and it came hard, the way the worst things do, without announcement, and she found herself on the floor of the compartment in the dark, unable to identify with any precision how she had gotten there or how long she had been there. And for the first time in the 8 days since the transport ship, she was genuinely afraid. Not of dying, that was the strange part of it. She had catalogued dying as a potential outcome of this assignment on the morning she accepted it, and she had placed it in the same file as the other hard probabilities. The kind of file you know exists and choose not to open unless the math forces you to. No, what she was afraid of, lying on the floor of the compartment with the fever making the porthole light move in ways porthole light should not move, was that Darren was somewhere on this dead world not knowing she was there, and she was going to fail him at the last step, the way you sometimes fail the people you care about at the last step, because the last step is always the one that catches you. She closed her eyes. In the space behind them, she found the commander. She didn't know how else to describe it. He was there the way things are there in the particular state between fever and sleep. Not a dream exactly, not a hallucination exactly, but the kind of visitation that happens when the mind is tired enough and the wound is bad enough and the stakes are high enough that the brain pulls up the person you most need to hear from and puts them in the room. Commander Reese, 14th Forward, dead 4 years on a ridge she never saw. She had served under him for 9 years, and he had the kind of face that the word grizzled was invented for, and he was sitting in the compartment with her, with the relaxed posture of a man who has nowhere else to be. "You're not dead yet," he said. "I know. So stop behaving like it." She laughed, or tried to, and the sound that came out was not quite a laugh, but his expression suggested it counted. He looked at her in the way he had always looked at her, which was directly and without the particular condescension that came with age and rank, the look that said, "I see who you actually are and I have assessed it, and I am not disappointed." "The thing about the last step," he said, and she had not told him what she was afraid of, but he had always known things she hadn't said. It was the most disconcerting quality he'd had, is that it looks like the last step from this side. From the other side, it's just a step. You don't know it's the last one until you're past it. She thought about this. "Darren," she said. "Is alive," Reese said, "and more stubborn than you, which is saying something. He's been keeping himself alive over there for 6 years on the principle that you would eventually arrive, which is either incredibly loyal or incredibly unrealistic, and I think you know it's both." He tilted his head. "The question is whether you're going to make it past the 7th day. Is that my choice?" "It's always been your choice." He said it the way he had said a lot of things when she was younger, with the patient exasperation of a man who has told someone something true many times and watched them resist it for years. Everything after the choice is logistics. She woke up on the floor to the small sound of the door opening. Sheva was standing in the doorway with the fever medicine and a cloth that had been dampened with something cold. and her face was carefully expressionless in the specific way that means the expression that belongs there is one the person has decided not to display. She crossed the compartment without speaking and crouched down beside Mara with the practical efficiency of someone who has dealt with the specific problem of a person on a floor before, and she pressed the cold cloth to Mara's forehead. Mara let her. After a moment, Sheva said, "You were talking." "What did I say?" "Nothing that made sense. Something about steps." Mara was quiet. The cloth was very cold and the fever had peaked and was beginning, slowly, to descend, the way fevers do when they've gone as far as they're going to go. "Did you sit outside my door again?" A pause. Sheva's face did not change. "You were loud." "I'm quiet as a principal." "You were loud tonight." The young woman reached into the pocket of her outer garment and produced the fever medicine without ceremony and helped Mara take it without being asked how, which meant she had been watching how humans took medicine, which meant she had been paying attention in a way she probably would have denied if directly asked. "Balin said suffering is data," Sheva said. "He said you learn more about a person from how they break than from how they perform." "What do you think?" A silence. The cold cloth moved slightly. Outside the porthole, the wrong stars moved in their wrong arrangements. "I think he was right about a lot of things," Sheva said finally. "I think that's not the same as him being trustworthy." Mara looked at her. The pale eyes were very level, very careful, the eyes of a person who has been wrong before about someone important and is taking longer than usual to arrive at conclusions. "How old are you?" "Old enough." "That's what young people say." Something moved in Sheva's expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the ghost of the possibility of one which was more than Mara had seen. 24, she said, or near enough. There was a period where the counting got complicated. 24. Mara had been 24 in the third year of the war, which was the year she had learned that surviving was not the same as being okay, and that the distinction mattered. She had been carrying that distinction ever since. She looked at Sheva and saw, under all the training and the stillness, and the very specific variety of toughness that comes from being built into a weapon from childhood, someone who was still running the math on what the distinction was. "Sleep," Sheva said. She stood and did not offer to help Mara to the bunk, which was correct. Mara would have refused and they both knew it. She moved toward the door. "You're not going to die on this ship." "Is that a threat or a promise?" Sheva paused at the door. She did not turn around. "It's a calculation," she said, and closed the door behind her. The tall one came in the morning to look at the wound. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides and examined the damage from a professional distance, the way a man who has been a soldier or a healer or both will look at damage to another person's body, not with distress, not with indifference, but with a kind of grim accounting. "This will scar," he said. "Everything does," Mara said. He left medicine she didn't recognize and instructions she could follow anyway, because the language of wounds is older than any translation algorithm. On the 8th day the ship shuddered and went dark, and she heard, for the first time, the sound of another galaxy breathing. She didn't know how else to describe it. The stars outside her porthole had changed. The arrangement was wrong in the way that dreams are wrong, almost familiar, the shapes close but not right, the distances off by some margin she couldn't calculate. Somewhere above her, through the hull, she heard voices raised in something that was not quite reverence and not quite fear. The young woman's voice was not among them. The planet they brought her to was called something she couldn't pronounce and thought of privately as the Ruin. It was a world that had been alive once in the way that worlds are alive, inhabited, layered with history, lit from inside by whatever force makes a place matter to the people who live in it, and was not any more. The grasses were too red. The sky was the color of water at the bottom of a well. Ancient bones of creatures enormous enough to have dreamed about crested the horizon in silhouette, and she found that she could not look at them for long without feeling something at the base of her chest that was not quite grief, but in the same neighborhood. She was given into the custody of a detachment of soldiers unlike any she had encountered. They wore armor that had been maintained past the point of logic, past the point of wear and damage and the need for replacement, maintained with the obsessive care of people who have been a long time without a supply line and have consequently decided that every item of kit is a ritual object. Their facepieces were gold, expressionless, and they walked in perfect formation and did not speak. She counted 37 of them. She thought there were more she couldn't see. Their commander was not what she had been told to expect from the mission briefing. She had been briefed on Karak the way you're briefed on a natural disaster: severity, probable trajectory, areas of most likely impact, recommended evacuation routes. Not as a person. Persons have idiosyncrasies, disasters have patterns. She had filed the briefing away under patterns and moved on. What she found, standing in a structure that had once been a great hall and was now mostly intact, was a man, not human, but close enough in the structural sense, the sense of a being that had evolved for bipedal locomotion and social hierarchy, and the particular pleasure of being the most informed person in a given space, who looked at her with the frank assessment of someone who has been thinking about her for considerably longer than she has been thinking about him. He was blue, not figuratively, not in the way of mood or metaphor, but literally blue in the manner of a man whose species had developed in a sun with different wavelengths. His eyes were red, and his hair was dark, and he was wearing the kind of uniform that has survived 6 years of exile in a dead galaxy without a single button unpolished, which told her more about him than the briefing had. "Sergeant Voss," he said, "you surrendered the crystal." "I did." "In exchange for a man's life." "Yes." He considered this. He was not, she noticed, angry. He was not, she noticed, contemptuous. He was, in the specific way of dangerous minds, interested. That seems like a poor trade. "Depends what you think people are worth." A silence. Somewhere in the hall, one of the gold-faced soldiers shifted weight with the faint sound of armor plates settling. Karak said, "You may keep your life, Sergeant. For now, it is more informative than its alternative." She bowed because she needed him to think she was cooperative, and because some debts you pay in the currency of small humiliations and nothing more. She kept her eyes up while she did it. He noticed. She was housed in a room off the main hall that had once been someone's private chamber. There were marks on the wall at shoulder height where shelves had been, and a depression in the floor that might have been a hearth. She stood in it on the first night and listened to the sounds of the ruin and tried to figure out where the young woman was. She found her on the third evening in the courtyard, which was the only way she thought of the open space to the east of the hall, a slab of ancient stone surrounded by walls on 3 sides and the sky on the 4th, open to a horizon of wrong-colored grass and enormous bones. The young woman was sitting on the edge of the stone with her weapon across her knees, which was the position of a person who is not on duty, but is not on duty either, the posture of someone who has been keeping watch for so long they've stopped noticing they're doing it. Mara sat down 6 feet away and did not speak. The young woman did not speak either. They watched the bones on the horizon go dark, as whatever passed for a sun on this world completed its descent. The sky went from red to purple to a black so complete it was almost comfortable. Neither of them moved. "His name is Balin," the young woman said eventually, not as though she were answering a question, as though she were putting something down somewhere she could find it later. "He said he was looking for a beginning." Mara waited. "He found it," a pause. "He didn't need me for the last part." The wind moved through the courtyard. On the far wall, something that wasn't quite a flag caught the air and turned. "What's your name?" Mara asked. A longer pause than it needed to be for a question that simple. "Sheva." "Mara." A silence that was, unexpectedly, not uncomfortable. "I'm going to get him out," Mara said. She did not say who she meant. She thought Sheva probably knew. Karek won't allow it. Karek won't know until it's done. Sheva looked at her then, for the first time, a direct look, the young woman's pale eyes with something complicated in them that hadn't been there in the corridor of the transport ship, or that had been there, and she'd been working harder to cover it. You surrendered the only thing that could have stopped him, she said, to save one man. Yes. That was stupid. I know. Something moved behind Sheva's eyes. She looked back at the horizon. The man you traded for, Darren. Mara's chest caught. She kept her face flat. You know where he is. Karek let him go. He's been in the outer settlement for 4 days. A pause. Karek wanted you to find him. He thought it would be useful to watch how you moved. Mara was quiet for a moment, processing this. And now you've told me. Now I've told you. Sheva's voice was very even. It was the evenness of someone running a calculation, not the evenness of someone at peace. Balin used to say that knowledge given freely is the only kind that costs the giver anything. Another silence. I don't know if he was right. It's the kind of thing that's hard to know until it matters, Mara said. Sheva made a sound that was not quite a laugh but in the vicinity of one, which was the most human thing Mara had heard in 8 days, and was something she would think about later for a long time. She found Darren in the outer settlement the next morning. He was sitting outside a low-walled building that had been converted into something between a way station and a canteen, eating something she didn't recognize with the focused attention of a man who has learned to be grateful for food in general rather than specific. He had the beard of a man who has been 6 years without a razor blade, not long enough to be impressive, too long to be intentional. He was wearing local clothes over his own underarmor, and he was considerably more alive than dead, which was the most important data point. He looked up when she sat down across from him. There was a silence that held 6 years in it. Took you long enough, he said. She laughed. It was not a comfortable laugh. It was the kind that happens when relief and exhaustion and the specific absurdity of being alive hit the same pressure point simultaneously. She laughed until her eyes were wet, and then she stopped and looked at him and said, "You look terrible." "You always say that." "You always look terrible." He passed her the bowl. She took it and ate without asking what it was, which was also something she always did, and he watched her do it with the expression of someone reassembling a picture they had been keeping in their head for 6 years to check it against the real thing. "The crystal," he said. "Gone. Karek has the coordinates." "Yes." He was quiet. He was, she had always thought, a person who understood the difference between a mistake and a choice, and who did not apply the word mistake to the second category even when other people did. "You should have let me stay in the pod," he said. "I know. I've been in worse spots." "I know that too." "So why?" "Because 6 years is long enough," she said. "And because I was there and the opportunity was in front of me and I made a call. I'm not going to justify it. It's done." He looked at her for a long moment with the scar-bisected jaw and the 6 years face, and then said, "Okay." That was all. Okay. She had loved him for that particular quality, the absence of the need to relitigate the decisions of people he trusted. She trusted him for the same reason. "There's a woman," she said, "Sheva. She told me where you were." "I know about Sheva. She's at a crossroads." He was quiet for a moment, eating. "You think she can be turned?" "I think she's already mid-turn. I think nobody has just asked her which way she wants to face." He considered this, and the tall one, Balin. Gone. He found what he was looking for and left her behind. Mara watched the street, mostly empty, local people who had learned to be somewhere else when Karak's soldiers passed. "I think she's angrier about the abandonment than the assignment." "That's useful." "That's a person," Mara said. Darren looked at her. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," she agreed. but lead with the second one. They stayed in the outer settlement for 3 more days, waiting. She needed Darren recovered enough to move at speed. She needed to understand the compound layout better than she did. And she needed, though she would not have said this out loud to anyone including herself, more time with Sheva. She found her in the compound training ground on the second morning, a wide flat space to the north of the hall that had been cleared of the red grass and covered in the local equivalent of packed sand, and which Sheva used in the mornings the way people use routines when their sense of purpose has been removed. Not because the routine serves anything, but because the alternative is standing still in a room with their thoughts, which is worse. She was moving through forms with her weapon deactivated, the amber blade dark, using the unlit hilt as a focus implement. Not fighting, not practicing, but doing something in between that Mara didn't have a word for and watched from the wall with the attention she usually reserved for structural assessments. Sheva was fast in the way that fast eventually stops being a description of speed and starts being a description of thought. The forms were not the forms Mara had seen in any training manual, not the square-shouldered military styles, not the broad circular motions of the combat schools she'd been through. They were something older, something that had been refined by a long time of use rather than a long time of study, the style of a person who has been in too many real situations for the training to remain theoretical. She moved through the morning light like someone who is remembering rather than thinking, and the scar along her jaw caught the light each time she turned, present, particular, not hidden. On the third morning, Mara sat on the wall while Sheva trained and said nothing for a long time and then said, "He trained you from when?" Sheva didn't stop moving. 13. That's young. It's standard. For the kind of thing he was building. A weapon. He said something more than a weapon. The forms shifted, a sequence Mara hadn't seen before, involving a low pivot and a counter that suggested someone had once attacked from below and to the right, and the memory of that attack had become technique. He said that weapons only know what they're aimed at. He wanted someone who knew why. Do you know why? Sheva stopped. She stood very still in the middle of the training ground with the unlit hilt in her hand and looked at the far wall of the compound. I knew what I was told. And now? A pause that was the length of a real question. Now I'm not sure that's the same thing. Myra watched her. The morning was quiet in the specific way of places that have had a great deal of violence pass through them and are waiting to see if more is coming. He left you the weapon, she said. He didn't leave you anything else. Sheva turned. Her face was very controlled and her eyes were not. What are you doing? She said. Not angrily, genuinely, like a question that had been sitting in the back of her mind for several days and had finally pushed forward. What is it you think you're doing with me? Mara thought about it honestly. I'm not sure, she said. I think I'm just talking to you. Nobody just talks to me. I know, Mara said. I think that's part of the problem. Sheva was quiet for a long moment. The amber hilt turned once in her hand, a habit, the kind of movement that happens when the body is processing what the mind hasn't caught up to yet. She said, Karak returns in 2 days. He'll be taking the cargo home. There's a window when the night soldiers rotate at the south gate 6 minutes between the 3rd and 4th hour of night. It's been consistent for 11 days. Mara looked at her. I timed it, Sheva said, in case I needed it. She said it without inflection, which meant she had been thinking about using it long before this conversation, which meant the turn had started considerably earlier than she had let on. 6 minutes, Mara said. It's enough. It's tight. Then don't waste it. The day Karak came back from whatever he had been doing in the interior of the ruin, with the cargo that had taken 3 months to move from wherever it had been stored to wherever he intended to take it, the sky went red in a way that was different from the ordinary red, the way that skies go red when there is a great deal of noise and fire and coordinated movement happening above the cloud line. Mara watched it from the wall of the outer settlement, where she had positioned herself because it gave her a direct sightline to the bay doors of the main hall, and because it was a place she had spent enough time that Karak's soldiers had stopped tracking her there. The ships came down in formation. Not military formation, she noted, or not only military formation. Ceremonial. There is a difference between the way ships land when they are bringing soldiers to a fight and the way they land when they are bringing something that wants to be witnessed. The night soldiers, she had taken to calling them that privately because of the way they moved after dark, in silence, with a quality of devotion she associated with religious orders rather than military units, formed a corridor from the bay doors to the main hall's entrance, and they were chanting something in low voices, a sound that moved through the ground as much as the air. Karak walked the corridor slowly. He was not hurrying. He had not hurried in 6 years. He was not about to start now. He was wearing the unpolished uniform and looking at nothing in particular in the specific way of people who are looking at everything. His red eyes passed over Mara on the wall without pausing. She did not bow. The soldier nearest her noticed. She felt him notice, felt the slight shift in attention, the recalibration of potential threat. She held still, did not reach for anything, did not shift her weight, did not give him the readable posture of a person preparing to act. Just stood there, arms at her sides, watching Karak walk into his own hall and did not bow. The soldier let her be. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. In the hall that evening, Karak spoke to his assembled soldiers and advisors in whatever language he used for formal address, which Mara did not speak, and Darren stood beside her and translated in a low voice, because 6 years had given him time to learn it well. The gist was, they were leaving. The cargo, the thing Mara had not seen and did not yet know, was loaded. The dead galaxy had served its purpose. The way home was open. The soldiers cheered in their low devotional way, and Mara felt the room tighten the way rooms tighten before something irreversible. She caught Sheva's eye across the hall. Sheva was standing apart from the group, which was different from standing alone. Alone is something that happens to you. Apart is something you choose. She was watching Karak with an expression that had moved from calculation to something older, something that had given up on calculation entirely. Myra worked her way around the edge of the hall. "He's taking the cargo back," she said quietly, standing beside Sheva. "The whole reason for all of this." "Yes. What's in it?" A pause. "Does it matter?" "It will matter to everyone in my galaxy." Sheva was quiet for a long moment. In the center of the hall, Karak was speaking again, gesturing towards something that wasn't there, the direction home, Mara thought, the direction of a galaxy he had been planning his return to for 6 years, with the patience of a man who has never doubted that patience is sufficient. "He calls it the restoration," Sheva said finally. "The great regeneration, everything that was ended begun again." A pause. More night soldiers, more night sister magic, enough to take the whole accord apart piece by piece and rebuild what the old empire was. "And you're comfortable with that?" "I was," Sheva said. Mara waited. "Balin said the cycle of power was the problem. He said there had to be something better." The pale eyes were very flat, very level. "He left to go find it. He didn't think I could help with that part." "Could you?" "I don't know." "What part do you think you could help with?" A long silence. Around them, the hall noise continued, the low devotional murmur of soldiers readying for something. Sheva said, "The part where someone stops him." The battle started 3 hours later in the dark, in the way that battles in the dark always start, which is suddenly and all at once. It was not a plan in any tactical sense. It was a sequence of choices made in rapid succession by 3 people who did not have enough information, which is the most accurate description of any battle plan. Mara had Darren, who had 6 years of knowledge of the compound's layout and the night soldiers' patrol rotations and the specific weakness of the southern gate, which had been repaired 3 times, and each time with slightly wrong materials because the original alloy wasn't available. Sheva had her weapon, now lit, the amber blade throwing warm, strange light across the compound walls, and a quality of directed, economical violence that Mara had only seen in a very few people in her career, and which she had the presence of mind to be grateful for rather than threatened by. The south gate opened in the 3rd hour. They went through in order, Mara first because she was expendable and because leading had always been her preference, Darren second because he knew the internal layout better, Sheva last because the people she had just turned against would recognize her face, and she needed to be where she could be seen to best effect. The first night soldier they encountered was alone at the inner corridor, the one who walked the late rotation with the particular lonely patience of a sentry who has been doing the same route for 6 years. He turned, and Mara was already moving. Not a fight, not in the traditional sense, just 3 moves that ended with him on the ground and her continuing down the corridor, which was what it looked like when the calculation was complete before the engagement started. Darren caught the armor before it clattered. The second and third came together, which was the problem. They always came together in the corridors after the 3rd hour. Mara had watched the pattern for 2 days without fully processing it until the moment it mattered. She had time to think before Sheva stepped in front of her. She had seen good fighters. She had seen exceptional fighters, the kind who make it look effortless, which is the lie that practice tells, the way a river makes moving water look easy when the actual work is happening in the weight and force below the surface. Sheva was the other kind. The kind where the work was visible, where you could see the choices being made in real time, each motion chosen and committed to with the specific weight of someone who understands exactly what is at stake and has decided that their body is the instrument and the stake is worth it. She moved through the 2 night soldiers with a clarity that Mara would have called beautiful under any other circumstances, and the amber blade did not kill, blocked, redirected, disarmed, until the corridor was clear, and the 2 soldiers were down, and Sheva was standing in the middle of it looking at her own hands. Balin would have killed them, she said. We're not Balin, Mara said. Something settled in Sheva's expression. Not relief, something quieter and less named than relief, the quality of a decision confirmed by the person who made it. They found the resonance chamber by following the sound, which was a low harmonic that the inner walls carried in a way that made the hair on the back of Mara's neck stand up in the atavistic manner of all sounds that the human body recognizes as wrong before the mind has categorized them. It was in the sublevel, a level that was not on any plan Darren had been able to reconstruct from memory, which was how Mara knew it predated the current occupation. The ruin had been someone else's place before it was Karak's. The resonance chamber was evidence of that someone else. The night soldiers came back from the dead the first time before they got there, and the second time because the night sister was faster than Mara's first approach. Her name was Caliph. She was old in the way that a very few things are old, not aged, not degraded, but accumulated, the way certain buildings in old cities have a quality of weight to them that new construction doesn't, no matter how large. She had been working the magic in the high chamber, and she had put the night soldiers on their feet twice already, and her eyes, when she turned to look at Mara, carried the specific assessment of a person who has seen many human soldiers and has not yet encountered a reason to update her assessment of the category. She was wrong about the category. Mara had been carrying the secondary energy cell in her boot for 8 days, because she had been carrying it in her boot since the transport ship, because she had been carrying secondary energy cells in her boots since her first deployment at 22, when a field tech had explained to her the concept of the emergency power source that no one checks for because no one has ever thought to look there. She had identified the resonance chamber's structural function on the 4th day. She had spent the following days working out the physics of what a direct energy discharge into a resonance amplifier would do. She threw it underhand, The way you throw something when you don't want the movement to be readable. And Caliph tracked the motion. She was old and accumulated and not slow. But tracking was not the same as stopping. And the cell hit the reservoir at the base of the chamber and discharged into it with a sound she would never be able to describe accurately to anyone who hadn't heard it. A sound that had both frequency and negation in it. Both very loud and somehow the opposite of loud. And the resonance chamber fractured, and the harmonic died. In the corridors above them, the night soldiers who had been rising for the third time settled back into their gold-masked stillness and did not rise again. The silence afterward was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She fought her way to Caliph through the smoke of the fractured chamber, which was not elegant, not cinematic, not the kind of thing that gets written down in official accounts. Her left arm was burned from a glancing strike she had caught in the first minutes. Her vest was torn. She was running on the specific physiological state, where the body has made a decision to continue regardless of its opinion about the decision. And the Night Sister faced her in the ruin of her chamber, with a blade made of something old and dark that Mara did not have a technical classification for, and did not need one to understand. The fight was short. Not because Mara was better. She was not better, not in any technical sense, not against something that had been doing this for longer than her civilization had been trying. She was better in one specific way, which was that she had been frightened for 6 years, and the thing that extends fear for 6 years without breaking you is the refusal to believe that the fear is the final word on the subject. She had been afraid continuously since the moment she heard Darren's distress signal. She was still afraid. She had learned to act alongside it rather than after it. She won. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired and burned and aware that she was bleeding from somewhere above her left eye, and that the chamber was still full of smoke, and that Karak had not yet left. She found him at the bay doors. He was standing with the cargo loaded and the ships fueled and the way home open, and he was looking at her with the specific expression of a person who has just revised a significant piece of their assessment of a situation. It was not fury. It was not respect. It was something more careful than either, the expression of a man recalculating from first principles. "Sergeant Voss," he said, "you've destroyed my night sister." "Yes. You've disabled my night soldiers. For now. And you cannot stop my departure." He looked at the bay doors, the ships, the dark sky above them full of wrong stars. "You are 2 people. You have no ship. You cannot follow me across the outer dark. Whatever you have done here, I leave with what matters." He was right. She knew he was right. He had done this, all of it, with the patience of a man who does not plan for single points of failure, and she had disrupted part of it but not the core. The cargo was loaded. The way was open. The restoration, whatever it fully entailed, was going home with him. She said, "What's my galaxy worth to you?" He paused. "If it's a restoration you want, it's worth something intact. A galaxy you've burned to the ground is a different thing from a galaxy that surrenders." She was bleeding into her left eye, and she did not lift her hand to wipe it. "I've read every after-action report from every engagement the Accord has run against remnant forces in the last decade. You know what they all say? That when you apply overwhelming force to a human population, you get something that looks like compliance and functions like rot. We don't end. We adapt. We degrade. We outlast." She held his red gaze. "I'm one sergeant. There are 14 billion more of us, and we've been at this a long time." Karak looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she had not seen there before, not concession, not fear, but the specific recalibration of a very good strategist encountering a variable he has genuinely undervalued. "I will remember you, Sergeant," he said. "Remember the 14 billion, she said. "I'm just the one in front of you." He left. The ships rose through the red sky and entered the dark between galaxies, and the sound of them faded until the ruin was as quiet as it had been before she arrived, which was not entirely quiet. There was the wind, and the distant groan of the great bones settling in the cooling night, and somewhere behind her the sound of Darren saying something under his breath that she thought might be a prayer. She found Sheva in the courtyard. She was sitting on the stone where she had sat on the first evening, weapon across her knees, the posture of someone who has been keeping watch for so long they can't remember what they're keeping watch for anymore. The sky had gone dark in the distinctive way it went dark here, completely, almost deliberately, as though this world had decided that night should mean something. The two of them were the only ones in the courtyard. Balin was gone to whatever beginning he had been seeking. Karak was gone to whatever restoration he had been planning. The night soldiers were down, and the hall was empty, and the cargo was somewhere above them, moving through the dark toward a galaxy that was full of people who didn't know what was coming. Mara sat down 3 feet away. Sheva did not speak. "He left you," Mara said, "not as an accusation. As a fact, the way you state facts to someone who knows them already, because sometimes the value of a fact is not its novelty, but the act of saying it out loud together." Sheva nodded. Her face was very still, the stillness of long practice. "He told you to be something more than a soldier," Mara said. "Then he walked away to be something himself without you." "That's accurate," Sheva said. Her voice was very even, too even, the specific evenness of a container holding more than it was designed for. Mara looked at her. The scar was visible in the dark, a pale raised line along the left side of Sheva's jaw that ran from her chin to her ear. Not a new scar, not a wound from tonight, but an old one, the kind that has had time to become part of the geography of a face rather than an interruption of it. Mara had noticed it on the transport ship and had filed it away. She had thought about it since. She reached out. Slowly, without disguising the motion, without explaining it, she reached out and laid 2 fingers very gently against the scar. Sheva went absolutely still. Not the trained stillness. Something older than that, something that happened before training, the stillness of a body that doesn't know what to do with something unexpected. The scar was raised and smooth under Mara's fingertips, and warm, the way skin is warm. Nobody had done this before. Mara knew it the way you know some things about people, not from evidence but from recognition, the kind of recognition that happens in the space between one person and another. Nobody had touched that scar gently, not like this. Not with the specific quality of this touch, which was not a warrior's assessment of damage and not a healer's clinical examination, but something else entirely, the kind of touch that says, "I see that this happened to you. I am not afraid of it. I am not going to look away." Sheva's eyes closed. Just for a moment, just for the space of a breath and then another. Mara took her hand back. She did not say anything. She looked out at the dark horizon, the bones, the wrong sky. After a long time, Sheva said, "What now?" Not a question, quite. More like a word left in the open to see if the air would do anything with it. "We get back," Mara said, "both of us. Karek will do what he does, and will be there when he arrives." She looked up at the sky. "The Purgils come here. The great star whales. I've seen the bones of the old ones all around this planet. They've been coming here for longer than anyone, and the living ones still orbit." She had been thinking about this since the 3rd day, since she had catalogued the orbiting silhouettes in her small notebook and recognized them from mission briefing images she had only half processed at the time. They cross between galaxies. They've always crossed between galaxies. We just need to ask. Sheva looked at her. "Ask. Politely, in whatever way you ask something like that." A pause. "You're serious." "I'm always serious. I just don't always look it." Sheva made the sound again that was not quite a laugh but in the same vicinity, and this time it lasted a little longer, and had a little more of something real in it. She looked at the sky too, at the shapes of things in slow orbit that were larger than anything a person has an instinct for, patient as anything that has been moving between worlds since before there were words for the movement. "I don't know if I can help your galaxy," Sheva said. "I've spent most of my life on the other side." "I know." You trust me anyway. I trust that you're figuring out which way you're facing. That's enough for now. Mara stood, brushing dust from her torn vest. Her arm ached where the energy burn had gone deep. Her eye had stopped bleeding, but the dried path of it was stiff against her skin, and she thought that, when it healed, it would leave a line she would carry forward, a new feature of her face, like Sheva's scar, like Darren's jaw, like all the marks that people accumulate in the process of continuing. She held out her hand. Sheva looked at it for a long moment. The pale eyes, the face that had been trained to show nothing and was showing something now anyway, something cautious and new, the expression of a person taking a first step on ground they haven't tested, not because they're certain it will hold, but because standing still is no longer an option. She took Mara's hand and stood. Behind them in the dark hall, Darren was already awake and moving, because Darren had understood the plan before she'd finished explaining it, because that was who he was, because she had known that before she surrendered the crystal and had been right. The ruin was quiet, and the sky was full of enormous patient things that crossed the dark between worlds, as though the dark were simply another road. In the morning, they were going to ask for a ride. It was the kind of plan that had no business working. Those were, in Mara Voss's experience, the ones that did. She wrote it all down before she slept, not because she thought anyone would find it, but because writing things down was what she did. She used the last 2 pages of the notebook she had requested from Balin on day 3 of the crossing, the notebook she had been filling with star charts and patrol timings, and the dimensions of a resonance chamber she had never expected to see. She wrote Darren's name and Sheva's, and the name she had given the planet in her own private taxonomy. She wrote the description of the star whale silhouettes she had observed from the porthole, their exact orbital positions as she had tracked them over 8 days, enough to make a rough map of the transit window. She wrote Karak's exact words, "I will remember you, Sergeant." She wrote her own response, which looked different on paper than it had felt in the moment. Less brave, maybe, or differently brave. The kind of bravery that comes from having run the math and accepted the answer. She did not write about the touch. Some things don't need to be written down because they aren't going anywhere. They install themselves in the architecture of a person, the way certain experiences do, not as memories exactly, but as changes to the structure, permanent rearrangements that you carry forward whether you're thinking about them or not. She had touched a scar gently, and a person had stopped, really stopped, for the first time in a very long time, and that had happened. And the fact of it would continue to be true in the galaxy between galaxies and the galaxy they were going home to, and any galaxy after that. She closed the notebook. Outside, Darren was already at the far wall of the compound, looking up at the orbiting shapes and eating something he'd found in the canteen kitchen that he hadn't identified but appeared to consider promising. She could see the line of his jaw from here, the scar she had memorized through a stasis pod window 6 years ago, and had never thought she would see this close again. He noticed her looking and held up whatever he was eating, in the universal gesture of a person who wants to know if you want some, and she shook her head, and he shrugged and kept eating. She looked up. The star whales were moving in their slow, vast orbits, luminous in the dark in the way of things that generate their own light rather than reflecting it, their transit paths crossing and recrossing the wrong sky in patterns she had been mapping for days. They were old. They were, she suspected, older than the ruin by a margin that made human history look like a brief misunderstanding. They had been crossing the dark between galaxies since before there were people to watch them do it, and they would continue after there weren't. And in the meantime there was a window, and there were 3 people standing under the dark sky of a dead world who wanted to go home. She would ask nicely. She would be specific, because she had learned that specificity was a form of respect, a signal to whatever you were speaking to that you had done the work of knowing what you needed rather than leaving it to the other party to guess. And she would be patient, because patience was also a form of respect, the signal that you were not in a hurry to impose your timeline on something that operated on a different scale. And when the answer came, if it came the way she thought it would, which was not in words but in movement, in the shift of an orbital path, in the way a creature the size of a city decided to come closer, she would say thank you the only way that could possibly count at that scale, which was the same way you said thank you to anything large and patient and willing, by accepting the gift with the care it deserved. She went to stand beside Darren. You mapped them, he said, not looking away from the sky. Third day. Of course you did. He offered the food again. She took it this time. It was strange and not unpleasant and had the taste of a world that had been alive once and was doing its best. When? Dawn, I think. The transit window is widest at what passes for dawn here, she chewed. We'll need Sheva. She'll come. You sound certain. He looked at her with the 6 years face and the scar and the patience of a man who has been keeping himself alive on the principle of someone's arrival. She made a choice tonight, he said. People who make choices like that don't unmake them. They've already paid too much for it. A pause. You know that. She did know that. She had made a choice on a transport ship in a corridor lit emergency red, with a stasis pod at her back and everything she'd been sent to protect in her pocket, and she had handed it over and said deal, and it had cost her, and she had never once in the weeks since considered unmaking it. The cost was the point. The cost was what made it a choice rather than an accident. She thought about that for a long time, standing in the dark of a dead world under a sky full of patient, enormous light, eating something unidentifiable with a man she had crossed a galaxy for, listening to the quiet of a place that had been asked to hold too much history and was doing its level best. In the morning, she was going to ask something enormous and patient for a favor. She was going to say please, in whatever language registered at that scale. And Mara Voss was, in her bones, in the structure of her, in the part that had been walking toward this since the moment she heard a distress signal 6 years ago, and decided it was hers to answer. She was going to be ready.